3, 2, 1. Welcome to Tech Talks. My name is Michael Bertoni, and I'm the founder and CEO of PhillyTech and your most connected technologist. I am unbelievably excited today. I'm usually excited, but today I am unbelievably excited. I have my best SaaS client and really greatest overall guy in the world. He loves flattery. Brian Glick. He is the founder and CEO of Chainio. It's great to see you, Brian.
It's good to see you, Mike. That's a high bar to live up to.
You are. You definitely are. It's great to have you here. Really unbelievable. It's been an unbelievable journey of probably the last, over 2 years now, 2.5 years been working together.
Yeah, I think you and I started working together in beginning of 19 or end of 18, something like that. So it's been a while now.
Yeah, it's been great, and I greatly appreciate the business. I tell you that all the time. But let's get into it here and just explain to the audience, what is Chainio? What is it? What do you do?
So we're a software integration platform in the logistics and supply chain space. And essentially what that means is in order for anything to get anywhere in the world, but if we just use the example of a package that comes off the assembly line sitting in China and it's got to be in a warehouse in Indianapolis, there are hundreds of companies, ocean liners and air freight companies and truckers and customs and so on, that have to get involved in moving that one package. That happens billions of times a year. Right. And across all of that, there's computers everywhere. And our job in the industry is to make it easier for the computers at all of those different companies to talk to each other.
Right. So in terms of your company, Chainio, what's your vision? So what's your big vision for the company? Where do you want to be in a few years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What's the vision?
So I used to have to explain to everybody first what the problems in supply chain were. But nowadays, I don't think for the next generation we're ever going to have to explain that again. What our vision is that when two companies sit down and say, we want to do business together, that they will both understand and assume that the way to transmit data between the companies, to share that I have something leaving and you need to know when it's arriving, that will move across the chain network, because we're creating the lowest friction way for all of these companies in the industry to work together. The analogy I like to use is that today, the way that companies integrate with each other across many industries, but especially in the logistics and supply chain space, is like if you and I wanted to make a phone call and you had to run over to my house and we ran a wire between our house. And we discussed how thick the wire was going to be and what kind of voltage we were going to use and what kind of phone. And then you needed to call your neighbor on the other side, and you did it again.
Right.
And again and again and again. And every time you want to make a phone call, you negotiated and created a whole new phone system.
Right.
As opposed to having a unified platform like the phone network that everyone connects to, and you can use different models of phones. You can use a phone that's 40 years old. I can use this year's iPhone, and we can still talk to each other.
Right.
And that's what we're building for the shipping and logistics world.
I love that. Unified network. I know we're not necessarily calling it that, but I get that. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, so you have a telephone network, you're communicating with each other, you have a unified network for the supply chain. That allows everybody to do business in an easier way, right?
Absolutely.
So in terms of the product, your differentiation, your value proposition, what does that look like? So why do your clients work with you? What's the differentiation of why they work with Chain? What's your value proposition for them?
So one of the things that's really hard in supply chain is there's no rules. There is no equivalent to the fact that banks generally have to operate the same way because they're heavily regulated, or medical billing is somewhat consistent, not easy, but somewhat consistent because of Medicare and Medicaid kind of create a dominant way that people work together. Shipping is just moving boxes, and so it can be chaos. And what we bring to the table and what our software does really, really well is it has what we call our canonical data model, which is just a fancy way of saying the words that we use internally to understand how shipping works, so that when different companies are using different terminology and using different methods of communicating, that instead of connecting them directly to each other, we interpret all of that into our software and then output it to the other company in a way that makes sense to them.
Right.
And what that means at the end of the day to our customers and to everyone who participates in our ecosystem is they get to save months and sometimes years of implementation headaches, because we don't have to argue about what this company calls a purchase order and what this company calls a purchase order. Or my favorite example is if I said to you, how would you define the arrival date of a shipment?
Right.
I'm going to put you on the spot. What's the arrival date of a shipment?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I mean, the arrival date would be when it actually gets to me and I open it.
Right. So if you talk to an ocean freight company, the arrival date might be when the ship reaches the port of Los Angeles and is sitting at dock off the port. Someone else in a warehousing company is say, well, the arrival date is when it gets to my loading dock to offload at my warehouse. If you talk to a last mile company, the arrival date is going to be what you just said. It's going to be when it's dropped off on your doorstep. So all of these companies use that same word arrival date to mean three different things.
Right.
And what our software does is, as we build the plugins to all of these different software at these companies, we have different words, and it doesn't matter what they are, for those three different dates. And so we make sure that we don't give one person's arrival date to someone else as their arrival date when there might be 22 days in between those actual dates.
Right.
Because what that means in the real world is if I gave that ocean company's arrival date to the company that was going to deliver to your house, they're going to tell you the thing's going to arrive tomorrow, and it's still going to be sitting in a ship in Los Angeles. Like, you're going to be pretty mad and not buy from that brand anymore.
Right.
So getting that data right and having a supply chain specific platform in the middle that sorts that mess out, and we only were talking about one piece of data. There's thousands
Right.
In our model. Getting that sorted is really the magic that only happens when you have supply chain expertise built into the software.
Right. And just talking about customers. So I remember last time we had Tech Talks, you couldn't really talk about customers. I don't know if you can now, but so you have logistics service providers, you have 3PLs, you have shippers, you have software providers. Who's your customer? Right. So who's your customer? How does that work?
Our customer. It's
Everybody
great.
is.
No, and when we say we can't talk about our customers, the internals of how companies do their supply chain operations are pretty closely held corporate secrets.
Right.
Right. So how Amazon does their internal supply chain is one of their big differentiators as a company. You know, Walmart would say the same.
Absolutely.
And companies like Procter & Gamble or PepsiCo or whoever it is would all say the same thing. So we don't necessarily talk about the internals of all of those behaviors at our customers. But what we can talk about is these three big categories. And when I founded the company, I drew a triangle on a piece of paper. And that triangle had the shipper, which is the company that's responsible for the product. It's the company whose brand name you would see on the box.
Right.
That's one party. The second is the logistics provider. So that's the people operating warehouses, operating ships, maybe just booking cargo, and they don't physically operate anything. They're a second contingency. And then the third is the software companies that actually have to provide services to those other two groups. We bring all three of them together. And so we treat them all as our customers. Sometimes we're working with one of those shippers or cargo owners or brands, whatever you want to call them, because they have lots of freight companies and they need to get data from all of them and get it into one clean database. Sometimes we're working with those freight companies because they work with lots of different brands who all have different needs and they need to coordinate that data. And sometimes we're working with a software company who says, I have hundreds or thousands of freight companies that I sell to, and I need my software to work with the internal systems at every single one of them. So everyone has this one-to-many problem.
Right.
And so we approach it from anywhere on that triangle of those three parties to help them solve when they have one system that needs to talk to a lot of systems or a lot of systems that need to talk to a lot of systems.
Right. So I know it sounds like you have a lot of customers, right? So is there a focus, right? Is there a focus that you try to get into first, like a type of maybe 3PL or a size of a 3PL, or is there because I know it's harder when you're smaller to focus, right? So is there an entry point focus for your company where you're trying to get into a particular type of company?
So when we were smaller, I will say the focus then was get what you can get, right? And that's the startup journey.
Yeah.
What we have over the years developed is a focus on what's generally called the international inbound supply chain, which is the process it takes from when a company wants to have something manufactured in another country and have it brought into their inventory in country two. And that may not be just China and the U.S. It could be product produced in the U.S. and sold in Europe. It could be, so it's not all just Asia to the U.S. It's, we have European customers buying from other European customers, but it's generally when it's moving on an airplane or an ocean container. So we tend to work with companies in that space. And that's a segment that is a little different than, what a lot of people think of in supply chain, especially as consumers, which is what's called last mile, which is the, just the UPS truck that's coming to your house, the FedEx truck that's coming to your house. So we tend to work a little bit further backwards in that process.
So in terms of the supply chain and logistics industry, it's really hard to do well in that industry. So why is that? Why is it hard to succeed in that industry?
It's an amazing industry, and I got into it sort of by accident. Found a job when I was a kid working in a customs company just a few blocks from where we are right now. But it's really complicated.
Right.
And, the millions of people and trillions of dollars that's spent to move things around the planet is unbelievably complex. And every year is different than the year before. And every day is different than the day before. So what you'll have is a lot of people will approach this industry from an outsider's view and take some very simplistic assumptions and then wash out really quick because they don't realize the underlying complexity of really any topic you open up. As an example, I was speaking to a company a few months ago who just a friend asked me to talk to, and they were importing basically golf shirts. And they were importing them one or two at a time, selling them on e-commerce stores. And then suddenly they had to sell a big full container to a big retailer. They were very excited until they found out that they were going to have to write a $50,000 check to U.S. Customs, which was going to eat up all their margin because there's very specific rules that when you start importing over a certain dollar amount, you have to pay customs duties in a different way.
Right.
And without getting into all the detail, that's an entire world underneath that of customs regulations that company didn't even know about. So any place you turn, even, we see it in the news today, what it takes, the kind of trucking to get something out of the port of Los Angeles and move it a couple of miles is a completely different industry than the trucking to pick something up in Chicago and drive it to Dallas.
Right.
Like those two groups of people don't even consider themselves to have the same jobs. And so it's a hard industry because it's a category, not an industry. It's like saying finance, right? Well, finance could mean my job is to process mortgages, or it could mean my job is to process billions of dollars in currency transactions, or to come up with monetary policy, right? Like that's all finance. And supply chain is kind of a broad category like that.
I think I read one time also that you're working off a standard body, right, of knowledge. I believe, like in the integration space, there are obviously hundreds or thousands of integrations. I thought I read a blog that you did one time where you're working off, and maybe I'm totally wrong here, but isn't there a standard a standards thing that you're working off of to do a lot of the work you do?
So one of the problems is there's lots of standard things. And I think what you're probably referring to is some work we've done with with an organization called the DCSA, which is the Digital Container Shipping Association. They're going to get mad at me if it's Alliance. I don't remember what the A stands for. Apologize to Ellen, who runs their marketing, if she sees this. But they are working with all of the ocean containers to companies, the big ones, Maersk and MSC, that you see on the side of the ships and on the side of the containers, to help standardize some of the behaviors in that small slice of the industry. Then there's other standards around trucking and other standards around customs. What we've done is, instead of trying to force the industry to have yet another standard, one that we made up,
right,
when we talk about having that canonical model inside of our database, what we're doing is creating a hidden standard so that we can then adapt to all of these other standards in the industry. So if two companies have chosen different standards to adhere to, they can still work together because we plug into all of them.
So we're hearing a lot of challenges, obviously. So in this industry, ships are at port, they're not moving, there's containers, stockpiling up, right? So how does chain flow into all these challenges that the layman person's even hearing about? I'm not getting things on time. It's a lot harder to ship things. Containers are piling up on top of each other. How does chain fit into that whole model there?
So one of the many, many reasons why that's happening is our process in this country, especially, but really globally, so I'm going to speak specifically about the U.S., was really designed around a more consistent, more stable environment, whether that's a lot of it was designed in the 80s and 90s and even back into the 70s, when global trade was more stable, political situations were more stable, the environment was more stable. And we've had these kind of cascading impacts that have caused all this chaos. Well, when you have that chaos, you have to do two things differently. One, you have to have a much more precise understanding of where things are, right? So you have to know, where's my stuff? It used to be you kind of let it leave China and let it arrive in Indianapolis, and you didn't really worry in between because things were consistent.
Right.
So one of the things we help companies with is aggregating data from a lot of different data providers who help them understand where's that stuff, but actually get that into the screens in their internal systems where they need it. And the other is, how do I react quickly when things change? I was recently at on a panel at a trade show where we were talking to a company, relatively small company, who used 3 freight providers traditionally to bring things in from all over the world. And last year they used 14. And so systemically, with 3, you manage it one way.
Right.
With 14, you're overwhelmed.
Right.
And so a lot of what we do with our customers, whether they're shippers or freight companies, is let them add those other providers quickly and get them system integrated in, so that those next 11 participate in the process the same as the 3 that she'd been using for many years. So we build those plugins so you can switch providers quickly, or onboard new providers quickly, or onboard new customers quickly if you are those providers. So we help make these companies more agile, because in the world where everything's changing so fast, you can't spend a year plugging into those new providers. Nobody has the time.
Right. So the logistics service providers are really doing great right now. And it's because of all these pains and problems and challenges that are out there. So why are they doing so well? So what's the major reason why these logistics service providers are doing so well?
So I'll challenge the assumption for a second.
Okay.
The very large ones are doing incredibly well financially, right? So the companies that move the actual ocean freight, they're the ones that we see as $26 billion profits for the year and all sorts of numbers like that. And then there's a lot of smaller providers who are actually suffering. And the reason they're suffering is, everything has become a lot harder, and operationally it's costing them a lot more money. So while these rates are going up, that money is tending to flow into kind of in one direction into these bigger coffers. And a lot of companies in our industry operationally, and a lot of people at the operational level, even inside these big companies, are working more hours, working much harder to accomplish the same amount of work, because this industry has somewhat neglected a lot of this data and automation over the years. So now we're still doing, I think I saw a McKinsey study recently, 75% of supply chain activity happens in Excel spreadsheets.
Sure.
So there's a lot of money going in certain directions, but there's a lot of pain spread all around the supply chain right now.
Right. So in terms of projects that you're doing that are kicking off, what does a typical project look like? So when you start with a client, maybe a shipper or a logistics service provider, what does a project typically look like most of the time? And what do you do? Like, what's the first 90 days look like?
Oh yeah. So one of our key principles is to start quickly and deliver value quickly. So time to value is something we say constantly. And so when we sit down with any company in the space, the first thing we try to identify is, how can our software be applied to a specific problem to bring value in the first 12 weeks? Not let's set up another 5-year roadmap,
right,
and see all the results at the end. So oftentimes, if we're working with a freight company, do you have one customer who's asking you for more data that we can help bring that data to that customer more effectively? Or if we're working, with a shipper, it's, do you have a particular provider who needs to give you data, and you need us to plug into their systems to bring that data in? It can be things as simple as, we have invoicing and credit card payment platforms on our network, so that we have companies who say, look, I really need to improve cash flow right now. And we can very quickly plug them in so that their customers can pay by credit card, where their existing software may not have that capability, and we bring a partner to the table. So, but in all of those cases, it's one customer, one overseas trading partner, one credit card platform. Let's get something in. Our solutions engineers sit down, and they are all people who have operated in the business. And they sit down with the business team, with the operations teams, the salespeople at our customers, understand what value we're trying to deliver, identify software on our network that can help, and get it rolled out. And do that all, in some cases in as little as a few days, up into maybe 2-3 months for some of the larger ones, but not a year.
So Brian, let's pretend that I am the CIO of a global logistics company.
That's going to be a stretch, Mike.
Let's pretend. So Brian, I've got a great internal team. I've got a great team that could do this integration. Why should I use Chain?
Most of our customers have great teams, and they have very long roadmaps of really innovative things they want to do. And what we do is actually not the most exciting work that your IT staff can be working on.
Right.
And what we're finding, especially in today's labor market, is if you don't put your people in a position to be working on the exciting stuff or the things that are unique to your business, where they're bringing direct value, first of all, you're going to lose them. And second, you're not going to keep up with the other companies in the industry who are doing that. So what we do is offload what is very important but unexciting integration work, so that your staff is spending their time either building that new web interface that you need, or doing that analytics project that you want to do, or figuring out that machine learning platform, and depending on the scale of company, that can be, something really advanced and something like Amazon would be delivering, or it can be just, hey, we have an IT staff that needs to, focus on keeping the lights on in our company and not be dealing with all of this noise from our customers.
So I have to do this work.
Like the work,
right? I have to do this work, but my team probably doesn't want to do it.
Yeah, they either don't want to do it, they're not trained to do it in a way where they are a customer-facing IT department, or they are trained and they do want to do it, but there's so much of it, and there's so much more new software. So 10 years ago, it was, you had one system and maybe an accounting system and maybe an email system sitting next to it. Now everyone's got 200 SaaS tools inside their application. I mean, think about, for any of us, how many things do you log into in your day? Making that all work together is just overwhelming for an organization that might have been built around doing 3, 4, 5 integrations a year. And so what we find is that sometimes IT departments and the people who have similar responsibilities, they can be a little resistant to us at the beginning. Oh, this software is, different or maybe even a little threatening. Once we get that first project knocked out, they go, oh, they just do the boring hard part and let me focus on the fun part of the project. Those same IT people who are resistant up front become our biggest advocates by the time we get to the second project.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, like you said, it might not be sexy, but it has to get done. And are you going in with a integration strategy? I mean, are the best companies you're working with going in with a full-on strategy and then starting work? Or are we landing and expanding? Like, what's that look like?
I like to use the term roadmap more than strategy.
Roadmap.
And the reason is that just because you look at a roadmap and you see it doesn't mean you actually have to drive the car that way. What the best companies do, and we call this our digital nervous system portion of our product, is sit down and understand who they want to be as a company. Nothing to do with computers. They lay that out for us, and then we identify the next 3 to 5 things that they should be doing, partners they should be bringing on, or pieces of that data world that can be brought together so that we do have a forward-looking view, but you always start with the first step. Right. And so we have a conversation about that long picture, write that down, refresh it every year, capture that in our software, and then, but you can't take the last step of a journey before you take the first step of a journey. Right. So then we get into that very high cadence, let's deliver something.
Value, like you said, value.
Because we all know, this year, these last few years especially, but really in any time, that 3-year plan isn't going to last 30 days, right? So let's continue to bring agile value to everyone.
So kind of going along sum up here, what do you think are the top 3 problems you solve for that are coming up again and again with your clients? What are those top problems, top challenges that you solve for?
So problem number 1 is always, I'm on one side of that relationship of a shipper and a logistics company, and I need to get data about where stuff is or what stuff needs to be moved back and forth. The functional, transactional, what we call in the space, bookings, ASNs, and milestones. Just what freight needs to move and is it moving? That's the biggest problem still. Sitting next to that is the problem of billing and invoicing and quoting and all of the things around the price and the financial transaction. And then really coming up quickly as number 3, and will likely be number 1 soon, or number 2 at least, is carbon reporting and being able to actually get a clear picture of the environmental impact of what we're moving. It's becoming, and in many parts of the world, this is old news, but in the US, we may be a little bit behind here, becoming a standard feature of any brand's mission to be able to be responsible to the consumer and report that data, which means also the carbon impact of moving that product to the consumer. And so integrating those types of tools into that data environment is actually pretty challenging, because a lot of the software was built before people even knew what carbon impact meant back in the 80s or early 90s, when we were all still just thought it meant the ozone layer. So, and if we stopped using hairspray, everything would be fine. So,
you don't. I was going to say.
I stopped using hairspray.
I was going to say.
I did my part.
You set yourself up for that. So, in terms of those three problems, why should people use Chain? If you were to be, again, talking to the CIO and he's experiencing or she's experiencing these problems, why should they be using Chain? What are the top reasons why they should start using Chain now?
It's really simple. Chain is the fastest way to move the needle on a business objective. There's only two reasons that people do anything in business: make money, save money. Mm-hmm. Those are the two things we do. And so when you deploy Chain in an environment, whatever things you're trying to get working together to get you to either make more money by landing more customers or save money by reducing costs or taking out inefficiencies, it is the fastest way to get from that innovation to an actual delivered production environment, bar none. We always say internally that integration is where innovation goes to die. That companies have all these great ideas and then they have to make them work with their existing environment, and that's where all those great ideas just stop. And so the time to value of using a platform built specifically for this is night and day versus starting from scratch.
I think we might have just came up with a tagline. We'll have to ask Brian, though. So make more money, save more money. So we'll maybe put some dots in there.
Yeah, you do.
Make more money, save more money.
You get two reasons, and we do this all the time internally. This is a great distilling concept, right?
Right.
Are you doing this so we can make more money or so we can spend less money, right? One or the other.
Yeah.
Those are the only two things we really talk about.
I love it. So last question, just give everyone an overview of the company, your culture, right? And why would people want to work at Chain?
You save the best for last.
That's why. So we're going to make sure everybody sees this.
We are extremely proud that we have a very open and inclusive culture. And that really starts from the ground up in the way that we recruit, the way that we hire, the way that we participate in industry events. We believe that everyone who works for the company is an adult and we treat them with respect. It's in our way we handle PTO. It's in the way that we hold our meetings, and that if people are treated with respect and given the space to do their jobs, and we bring in people from diverse backgrounds by creating an environment where those people feel safe and appreciated, that it just creates a company that people want to work at. And frankly, there are easier things for me to do with my life than start a company. It is very difficult, and I don't want to sound like I'm complaining. I've been extremely lucky, but I want to work at a place that I want to work at, and I want to work at a place where when we get on the phone or on a Zoom call or meet face to face, that people are smiling. And the way to do that is to treat people. It's very simple, right? Treat people with respect. Give them the space to be who they are and to lead their lives the way they want to lead them.
Right.
And when you're just open and honest about that, everything else follows from that.
And I've absolutely seen that. I mean, personally, just you make everybody, so whenever I'm on calls or wherever, you make everybody just feel comfortable, right? Obviously you...
Except for you, Mike. I like to torture you.
You torture me. He loves to torture me. But so... Brian, any closing remarks, right? This has been great. So we did a show, Brian and I did a show, probably about over 2 years ago now. And we've grown up. It's been great. So any closing remarks before we drop off here?
Not really, Mike. I mean, again, thank you for having me back. And, I appreciate it. And I do appreciate all the work that PhillyTech does for us. We've grown from... I think there were maybe that first show, there was probably 5 of us. And a year ago, there was 11 of us. And now there's about 50 of us. And that'll be, continue to grow. And your team has been a really big part of that. So I just want to say thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So it's been awesome having you on the show. And, so you're just a walk away from here. So, obviously it's great working with your team, great working with you. And thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thank you.
So, thanks, Brian.